Okay. And we are live, and there may be a lag of about 10 seconds.
That's great. We'll wait for people to join.
Yes.
Okay, I guess we're live now. Okay, let's wait for people to join and then we will start. Hi, good evening,
Yeah.
everyone. So we have around 10 people, 12. Let's give it some time. So good evening, everyone. We just gone live, waiting for a maximum amount of people to join so that we can have this 3-hour marathon session spread over next 3 days. For those who want to prepare or are preparing for the CISSP exam. All right, I think we have adequate number of people. Right, so we'll start. Right, so good evening, everyone. I'm Colonel Subhajeet Naha. I bring this marathon session of around 3 hours for the next 3 days consecutively. Today will be the day one, and that will comprise of the journey to CISSP preparation, which is considered one of the most industry, you know, accredited certification, which is also called the gold certification in information and cybersecurity. So I thought of taking this live session because there are a lot of you who uh, would like to start the preparation or who are already in their preparation journeys. And I almost started this almost 4 years back in 2000. 5 years back now, 2021, when I first started a free CISSP session on LinkedIn, and almost 150 people joined from all over the world, and that was the start of Protect's journey. Then I retired and I started Protect. So I thought, okay, let's give it back to the community and help people to pass the certification. Right. So I'll come straight away, jump to the brass tacks of how to prepare for CISP, what is all about, and without any major delay, I will straight away jump to the today's agenda. So today we are covering domain one, right, which is roughly around 16% slated, but it can range between 15 to 19% on the. If you go to the ISC square uh, course curriculum, it's roughly around 16%, but it ranges. It's a variable exam, so it can choose you somewhere between 15 to 19%. What does it cover? It covers governance, compliance, and legal frameworks, which are universal in nature. It's not something which is expected. You are expected to know or remember or cram. What is the task of an information security officer? What do you expect from a CISO or an information security manager for a small company? Right. It'll have risk management concept as to security is a very, very wide parameter. Okay. Today, every day is a new world. Today, we have AI looming, not looming, entered our lives. Right. So, how do we manage the risks? Domain two is about asset security. What are the different kind of assets that we have, and what are the primary asset in information security, which will be data, right? Data, its associated systems, and how do you manage the life cycle of a particular asset in an organization. So for that, classification is very important. I'll be also tackling few CISSP type questions to give you an understanding of what kind of questions can you expect from in CISSP. Right now, once we start our preparation journey, I always give a for CISSP a three-pronged strategy. Right, this is a very very effective strategy which we have picked up from the military ways of learning. That whenever we want to pass any exam or a certification, we do three rounds of iterations. Okay, the first round is a very very high level iteration where we get to know the subject. Okay, the second iteration is where we do a thorough preparation, and this is where we try to understand what are our strength areas and weak areas. And third is a consolidation exercise where we do a consolidation of whatever we have learned, and then we say, okay, we have learned, and then now we uh, do practice questions and answers. Now, this is held strongly with all CISSP aspirants, which I have trained over the last 4 years. It's a very simple strategy. Generally, phase one lasts for around 45 days, phase two lasts for around 25 days. So that covers roughly 70 days, and phase three lasts for around 20 days. So you can clear this very marathon of a certification in roughly 90 days. Right. So that's what I wanted to explain. So, what I would like to say is that if you are planning for CISSP exam, the first thing that you should decide is, do you have a 90-day window with you, and are you ready to commit to the exam? So what you do is you book the exam and then start preparation, from the reverse. So today I will introduce you to various concepts which are used in information security from CISSP lens. Right. So domain one is roughly security and risk management. It ranges between 15 to 19%, but as per the slated syllabus, it's around 16%. Right. So what are the core things that are covered in uh, uh, the CISSP exam? First is the CIA triad. Favorite question, right? We will get this favorite question of what is the CIA triad. So when we look at confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? What do we mean by confidentiality? What do we mean by integrity? And what do we need by availability? So it's a question thrown to all the people who are attending this session right now. When we talk about confidentiality, what is the keyword which comes to your mind? Can you type it out on the chat? If you want to protect confidentiality of any asset, any information asset, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? You can chat it on the chat window. If you're talking about confidentiality, what is that one word or one sentence that you would like to associate it with when you're trying to protect confidentiality of any asset? You can type your answer in the chat window. Somebody said encryption, somebody says secret, somebody said access control, somebody said asset control, sensitive data. Okay, any more answers? Encryption. Is encryption the only way to protect a data asset? Not the only one, right? Somebody said identification, somebody said protection. Now, will you all agree that if I say the aim of confidentiality is to protect any kind of unauthorized access to an asset? Will you agree with that? Yeah, somebody said, Abhishek Ranjan said authorized access. When we're trying to protect confidentiality, we are trying to basically protect anyone from accessing an asset in an unauthorized manner. Now, the controls can be any. Controls could be encryption, Unauthorized access to an asset could mean physical controls. You can put a lock on your server, right? You can put a tape on your server. That's also a control, right? The main aim when you're trying to protect confidentiality at a very high level is to, you know, protect ac- access to the asset from any unauthorized access. And when you want to find the unauthorized access, what kind of unauthorized access is there on an asset? Say you are trying to protect your home. Okay, this is your house. You want to protect. Okay, and what is the risk to your house? What could be a confidentiality risk to your house? What kind of what what would you like to protect from somebody from outside, right? You would like to have, maybe your wife's jewelry put in a small locker box, and you would like to protect it. What is the basic control you are going to put? Unauthorized access. You might put a door and a lock, right? That could be one basic control. You could put a CCTV camera. It could be a detective control, right? But will it prevent unauthorized access? No. The only thing that can prevent unauthorized access is the simple lock, a, a, a $1 lock. So whenever we are saying confidentiality, we are protecting the asset against any kind of unauthorized access. That's the key word. Control can be anything. You can have access controls, you can have identification, and access control systems. You can have encryption, you can have data padding. Those are all controls, right? So therefore, confidentiality protects the unauthorized access. What does integrity in a CIA triad meant for? So confidentiality was about unauthorized access, preventing anyone from getting unauthorized access. What does integrity do? Right? Two words, right? Like unauthorized access controls. What does integrity, if you are trying to protect integrity of an asset, what are the two words that can come in your mind and to protect an asset from any integrity violation? You can chat it out put it on the chat. Yeah, somebody said prevent unauthorized alteration. Very correct. Unauthorized changes, right? But then I'll add something more. You can have unauthorized changes by someone from externally, but you would also like to prevent unauthorized changes by authorized subjects. Now that, what do you mean by that? You'd also like to prevent any changes made by authorized subjects. What does that lead to? That leads to a concept called non repudiation, right? What is the non repudiation concept of non repudiation? So, if I am an insider risk and I'm trying to I have an authorized access and I am an insider risk and I'm trying to change the integrity of a data asset, and tomorrow I can go back and say, I did not do it. So when we implement integrity controls, we say that prevent unauthorized changes by both authorized and unauthorized subjects. That means now I'll have to implement certain controls which can establish non repudiation. Non repudiation means a subject cannot disclaim later that I have not done this task or I have not done this activity, right? And this generally leads to, if you would have seen a concept of logging, you log every activity. Why? Because you don't want someone to go back and say, I did not do it, right? And finally, a very, very less talked about security concept is about availability. Security issues can cause unavailability of an asset, right? If we have not engineered our infrastructure correctly, if we have not put in basic denial of service controls on our web applications, if there are unauthorized changes being pushed into our production environment, our systems can go down. And that can lead to unavailability of a particular asset. Therefore, confidentiality, integrity, and availability is a very, very major concept which asked in CISSP exam, right? And from there, we get the concept of non-repudiation, which I talked about. Whenever we talk about integrity, we also talk about authenticity, how authentic the information is, right? Now, what happens is when we talk about CIA triad, we also talk about the reverse triad of something called the DAD triad. If confidentiality fails, it leads to disclosure. If integrity of an asset fails, it leads to alteration. If availability fails, it leads to destruction. So at times, CISSP also tries to test your concept of the reverse of CIA triad, which is called the disclosure, alteration, and destruction triad. And CISSP has a habit of asking negative questions. What if this does not happen? Then what will happen? So it asks a lot of negative questions. Remember that. What are the consequences of confidentiality not being met, right? So these are the types of questions which generally come in CISSP very often. Next concept which is definitely get tested is the concept called defense in depth, right? So defense in depth is a concept where if you want to protect an asset, it's a military concept. It's a well, over a period of time it has come from military concepts. Now, whenever you try to protect an asset, you do not want the, you know, if you are protecting it with certain elements to protect this particular asset, you do not want, you know, the enemy to get into the asset without even encountering your controls, right? So that's a very basic military concept, because that leads to something called a control gap. If you see there's a control gap between two defensive positions, there's a gap, and enemy would like to exploit that. So whenever we deploy any asset, we need to carry out a risk assessment, and based on the asset, we deploy layers of controls, right? The defense in depth is a concept where you said based on the risk an asset has, how many layers of controls would you require? Okay. If the risk is very high, you will have multiple layers of controls, right? Also, we also have encountered in the world of TCP/IP, right? Because TCP/IP inherently did not carry any uh, security mechanisms. We had to create layers of security at physical layer, at data link layer, at network layer, at transport layer, at application layer, right? Because of different kind of protocol frameworks which is followed in TCP/IP, which is the mainstay of the internet, right? So we're talking about information security today because of the success of TCP/IP, because of the success of digital systems, right? Then whenever we talk about security, we talk about access controls. Why? Because when we talk about confidentiality, integrity, and availability of protecting any asset, right? What stands between a subject which is trying to get access and object which you are trying to protect is an access control. Because ultimately, the manifestation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability results in the form of an access control, right? So when we talk about access control, access needs to be granted based on two concepts, which is called least privilege and need to know. So what is the subtle difference between what is the subtle difference between least privilege and need to know. Okay. Now, least privilege means uh, minimum access levels which a subject needs to do his task, right? So I need just a key to, if there are 3 rooms in my house, I just need to, if I'm a plumber, I just need to go to the washroom to fix the, you know, uh, some sink set or something which has gone bad. So I should be able to only walk into that room where the fixing is required, you know. So that's my least privilege. Need to know means uh, a subject might have the clearance to access an asset. You know, he has the clearance. His clearance is confidential. The asset is also confidential. Right? But still, he is not granted access. Why? Because this asset does not affect the subject's task. So even though the subject may have the rights, but still they are not given access to the asset. And that's the concept of need to know. So these are the concepts which are tested very, very often in your CISSP exam, right? Now, once we look at the basics of what is covered in CISSP, then we move to governance, right? Now, what do we mean by governance? Now, governance is about, you know, driving an organization, right? Now, there are four key things when you drive an organizational governance. So, my first question is, who drives governance in an organization? Can you put it on your chat? In an organization, for any organization, for a small organization or a big organization, who drives governance? That's the first thing. Two-word answer. Let me see answers rolling into the chat. Thanks, Ian. Thank you so much. Yes, so Ian said senior management. Very correct. Right? Group of senior management, board members, top management, they all, so we all understand that. Great. Right? So if senior management is responsible for, or rather accountable, and there comes the concept of accountability, right? Is senior management responsible or senior management accountable when it comes to driving governance? Right? And therefore, you should always understand the concept of accountability, which is also somewhere loosely coupled to something called ownership, who owns, and second is responsibility. Okay, and responsibility is custodianship. Owners are legally, they can be held legally responsible. They can be pulled into the code of law. Responsible people are supposed to do their task, and therefore owners are supposed to carry out due diligence, and custodians are should do prudent man rule. They should ensure that due care is followed, somewhere down the line, right? So accountability and responsibility is a concept which leads to something called due diligence and due care, which I'll explain. So the first question which you all answered correctly: who drives governance? Top management. If top management drive governance, who should drive information security governance in an organization? This is my next question. Who should drive information security governance in an organization? Somebody says CISO. Can CISO drive information security governance? Yeah, today we have CISOs to drive information security governance. Very correct. But what about smaller companies who may not have a CISO? Yeah, Maksud, you do not have a CISO in your company. So who is driving information security governance? It's you, right? So it's fluidic, right? Somebody has to be made responsible to drive. It could be the CEO. We are a small company, we're a startup. Okay. I am the CTO of the company. I drive information security governance in my organization, right? So a CEO can also drive information security governance. Okay. For public companies, it could be board of directors and top management, but smaller companies, you know, somebody needs to take ownership of the security. That's what it means. That somebody has to take ownership. It's not always the CISO who will drive governance. We should understand that there has to be ownership of security, right? That's the concept I was trying to get to. Right now, once you go into security governance, how do you drive security governance? That's the next question. How to drive information security governance or any governance? One word answer. Please put it on the chat. For a small company, anybody can drive. You just have to ensure that that person knows that he has to drive it. He or she has to drive it. It could be the CEO, it could be the IT manager, it could be anyone. But the concept is somebody has to own security. Okay. So how to drive information security governance? Somebody said GRC. Somebody said Tuhin. Even CFO can drive information security governance if he is competent, and if he has been uh, made to understand how to drive it. So how to drive information security governance? Yes, somebody is correct. Rest all are somewhere down. You always drive information security governance by rightful policies. A well-governed organization will have right set of policies. Right? You always drive uh, governance through policies, and then you might have to drive the policies. You will prepare set of procedures, you will prepare set of plans, you will issue guidelines, you will have training, right? But ultimately, a policy which can be implementable. Who has a 40 page or a 50-page policy in their organization? I don't want you to disclose. You know, just put your hands on your chest and say, okay, our information security policy is a 50-page document which nobody has ever read, right? Is that a right policy to have? A policy is a very, very high level, broad document which can be understood and can be implemented. You do not make a policy for just piece of show work, right? So policy generally, in my experience, any policy which is more than 2 pages or 3 pages can never be an implementable policy. Okay. But at times even auditors make mistake. Seen auditors coming and saying your policy has to be very, very comprehensive. What is comprehensive is your procedures. Your procedures need to be highly comprehensive so that people know what exactly needs to be done, right? But we are going for textbook. We are going to give an exam, so we are sticking to textbook. We may not be ideal in our real life. So how do you drive governance? We drive governance by setting out right policies. Now, The first part was we need a policy, of course, right? But from where do you start your security journey? What help do you need to start a security journey? What kind of help would you require to start your security journey? Would you like to take any help? And if you would like to take any help, what would be that help called? Would you need some kind of help? And what would you like to call that help as? We can have a small, answer session. What would you like to get help to start your security journey? Somebody said a standard. Okay, maybe. Mohan said he needs a standard. Standard could be industry specific, isn't it? Somebody said framework. What is more suitable? Would you need a standard? Somebody said management buy-in, very low level, right? I don't need a management buy-in, right? I need to select a correct framework. Why? Why do I need to select a correct framework? Okay, a skeletal approach. Ian is correct. I need a skeletal approach which I can fit to my organization. Whenever we start a security journey, if I'm not following a framework, then it will be a very, very unstructured approach, right? Without a framework, I cannot start my security journey because somebody has made a framework beautifully. And if I select that framework, I don't have to go search in the wild what I need to do. So therefore comes my second question is, which is the most well-known framework you would like to implement? So my security journey starts with a framework, and which is the most well-known framework, which is universally acceptable. If you want to prove that we have some kind of a security management in our organization. Everybody said ISO 27000. Very nice. NIST, NIST, right? So everybody knows about NIST and ISO 27000. Now, NIST makes frameworks for federal agencies in the US. But since these are open frameworks, you can adopt them, but very complex frameworks. You may not be able to achieve what you want to achieve by implementing NIST frameworks. But NIST has a very, very simple framework, which is also called NIST CSF. So these are the two frameworks universally well known for any non-governmental organizations, but there are government organizations which go through mandatory requirement, and US federal agencies have to implement NIST 853. Or if you are a SaaS platform, FedRAMP, right? So NIST is a US specific framework, but ISO 27001 is a framework which is accepted world over. And ISO 27000 has a family of frameworks, right? For it has a framework for cloud, it has a framework for privacy, it has a framework for business continuity management. For information security, it is ISO 27001, a set of 93 controls. Okay. So that's what. Then we also have COBIT. Somebody said, Abhishek said COBIT. Yes, COBIT is also a very well known industry framework, but it is management of IT and it has a lot of component for managing security in the IT domain also. Right. So that's what we meant by when we look at frameworks. Now, whenever we adopt frameworks, a framework always needs two very important requirements. One is called scoping and one is called tailoring, right? So whenever you make a framework is a very, very, ISO 27001 EAN is a industry standard, can be adopted as a framework, right? If you look at ISO 27001, it's a industry standard, right? I can get certified against that standard, but I don't have to get certified. I can pick that standard, adopt it as a framework in my organization. Until and unless I don't want to get certified, I can use it as a framework, right? But it's an industry standard. If you look at it, ISO gives standardization, right? So NIST is a framework. NIST is a framework because uh, it's a skeletal requirement. ISO 27000 is very specific. So therefore, ISO 27001 is considered a standard. However, nobody stops me from taking that and suiting my requirements. ISO 27001 never tells you that you need to have access controls. You need to have access controls only if you have assets on which they have risk, and therefore you want to lower down your risk or you want to mitigate your risk, right? So we will not go there right now. So industry standards frameworks exist to help you to drive your organization towards security governance, and you need to always scope and tailor the frameworks or standards to your requirement. Frameworks, standards, baselines, these are all very, very broad and high level. You need to scope and tailor uh, it to your need. That's a very, very broad understanding. Now, what is scoping? Scoping means where in your organization, where is it applicable? Okay. Where does it apply in your organization? And tailoring means what do you need out of it to suit your requirements, right? So these are two very common questions in CISSP. When we talk about a framework, what do you mean by scoping and what do you need by tailoring? Right. So once you take a standard or a framework, you implement it to suit your requirement, right? And then you drive the security. Now, driving the security governance is responsibility or ownership of the top management. Then, who is, how do you manage security? So, for managing security, we know that firstly, a very key part is to define roles and responsibilities. Therefore, you expect to know some common roles and responsibility about ownership, about custodianship, about administration, about auditor, about users, right? The next is you need to have a strategic plan, right? If you have a strategic plan, you also need to have a tactical plan, and you need to have an operational window or an operational plan, and then followed by system specific procedures, guidelines, which you need to manage security on a daily basis. Now, as I told you that one of the most important part of driving security would be through your organizational policies. You'll have standards, baseline guidelines, and procedures, right? But one very important part for driving security today is understanding the legal and regulatory requirements. So you may be in any part of the world. World has become flat today, okay, and we do business all around the world, okay. Or organizations from US are doing business in Middle East, in US, in India. It's a complex web of regulatory and legal requirements. You are picking up data of European citizens, then you have to be compliant to GDPR, right? How long are you going to store the data? So there are very, very complex legal and regulatory requirements if you are in a legal and regulatory space. We are just working with one of our clients in UAE who has a very complex understanding, and one of their entities is in a European nation where we have to deploy DORA. And once we went to deploy DORA, we realized that we have to deploy rollout on organizational wide because their main organization is a third party to the entity which is in Europe. So it's a very, very complex nature, and you have to probably, as an information security officer, need to understand the legal and regulatory framework of that particular country, of the client who you are serving. Therefore, understanding laws and regulatory requirements has become very, very critical in the space of cybersecurity, resilience, privacy, data localization, and data sovereignty. Okay, so this is a complex uh, domain which you will encounter in your daily lives, in your professional lives, when we talk about cybersecurity controls, which are more or less everybody is aware of now. Resilience is something which we are talking about when we are looking at what are the dependencies because of SaaS platforms, because of API dependencies. There's a lot of your work will get stopped tomorrow. If Cloudflare goes down, half of the internet is down. Tomorrow, if AWS goes down, 80% of the internet is down, right? So do you understand your dependencies, and if that dependency goes down, how does it affect your availability, right? Privacy is a major concern today. We have all the regions in the world have come up with their privacy frameworks and privacy requirements. Data localization has become a very major requirement. Most of the countries today are talking about any kind of privacy information, any kind of security information should stay within the boundary of that particular country. And data sovereignty means who has the legal jurisdiction over the data. Now, suppose you are using, say, a SaaS application whose data is stored in US, and you are in some country where tomorrow US feels that there is a geographical issue and we will not give you access. Data sovereignty means who has the legal right over the data. Data localization means have I stored the data within the geographical boundaries of that country. And sovereignty means I'm using Microsoft 365. My data might be getting stored in some US data center. I'm not even aware. Tomorrow, if I want the right over that data, can I claim my legal right over that data? That's the issue of data sovereignty. Right. Now, when top management does what it's supposed to do, it implements a governance framework, it follows the laws and regulation, it sets the security policies, right? What does it lead to? Okay, this is my question. When your top management does everything right, what does it prove? Tomorrow you still get hacked, you know, still there is a data exposure which happens, and you stand in the front of the court of the law. If you have done everything right, what does that uh, lead to? Okay, does it lead to due diligence, and does it lead to due care? So whenever top management takes good decisions, what does it prove? Right, Mohan said both. Ian said due diligence. Rahul said due diligence. So when top management does something right, when parents do something right, you are being diligent. Okay, your kid might be small, they may not take the right decisions. The parents are supposed to take, long or informed decisions. Our top management is supposed to take informed decisions. And when you do everything right, it leads due diligence. Due diligence is a legally defendable term. Okay, if I've done my risk assessment, I have deployed the controls, and still I get hacked, I can prove that, look, I did everything right, but still fine, there could have been certain gaps, but our processes are fine, but we are not competent enough to maybe withstand a particular attack. That will not absolve you of any negligence. Any kind of negligence can be proven that we have not done any kind of negligence by being due diligent. If our processes were right, if our policies were right, data breaches can happen. So therefore, due diligence is a very, very testable term on the CISSP exam. So if due diligence is taking informed decisions which can be legally protected, what does due care mean? Due care means taking the right steps, taking a prudent person rule. I'm supposed to, when I'm crossing the road, I'm supposed to look left or look right, depending upon whichever country you are in. That's my due care. When I'm driving a motorbike, I'm putting a helmet on. That's my due care, right? But as a parent, if I'm not ensuring that my kid is going to drive without a license, that's due diligence failure, right? So keep that in mind. The next is privacy laws. Privacy has become a very, very hotly debated concept since around 2018, when GDPR came into implementation, right? So privacy becomes a very, very testable concept, and there are few important concepts about privacy which you should know is uh, consent, data subject rights. What are data subject rights? So data subject rights, consent is of course, and one of the major right is right to erasure. That if I don't want my data to be kept with you, I have the right to ask you to erase my data. So privacy has become a very, very hotly debated concept, and with GDPR coming in, a lot of countries all over the world have followed the GDPR requirements and developed their own privacy framework. So as a information security officer, you are also supposed to understand privacy very, very in slightly more greater details. Now, once your governance and management is in action, the next thing is always to understand risks. What are the risks to your organization? And for understanding risks to your organization, you have the risk management process in place. And to have a risk management process in place, you can take help of risk management frameworks. And there are some common risk management frameworks such as ISO 31000 and ISO NIST SP 837, right? These are the most common frameworks. We also have frameworks like FAIR. Now, risk management process is very straightforward. You need to understand your threats, you need to understand your vulnerability, right? And you need to understand the value of your asset, which gives you the overall risk. A risk can be measured in two ways. It can be either measured in a quantitative manner, where you get some kind of a number, or you can do a qualitative risk assessment. Okay, because at times you may have so many risks that you may not be able to physically calculate the numeric values, or you might have risk which may not be associated to any quantified number, and there you do a qualitative assessment such as low, medium, or high, right? So when we do risk assessment, the aim is to understand what are our assets, what are the risks, and what are the prioritizations. We need to understand the priority of the risk so that we know how much investment do we need to do to manage the most critical risks. Otherwise, you will keep spending money on risks which may not matter to you, right? So that's the main aim, to have a risk assessment. There are certain quantitative techniques by which we do risk assessment, which are there given in the book. The aim is, once you do a risk assessment, you might have some risk, which is the initial risk. If it is acceptable to you, then it's fine. If not, you generally mitigate a risk. And once you mitigate a risk, you have some residual risk. Okay. And what do you do with the residual? You can either accept residual risk, or you can transfer residual risk. Depends upon the appetite of any given organization, right? So that's for how you treat a residual risk. The next chapter is for business continuity. Now, it's very important, once you've done your risk assessment, you know that what are the risks, and you manage your risk on a daily basis. When do you do business continuity planning? That's my next question. When do you do business continuity planning. Risk management is something which is continuous, which is done daily, which you understand that, okay, these are the risks to my organization. What do you mean by business continuity planning, and what is the main aim of business continuity planning? Can you uh, say it in 3 words? For managing dash dash. That's my answer. Why will I do business continuity planning? For managing what? Managing dash dash. Managing dash risks. Okay, I give you one. So, why do you do business continuity planning? For managing dash risks. You can chat it out in the managing sustainable business, managing disruption. Ian says managing sustainable business. I said managing dash risks. That means in business continuity planning, I'm managing some risks. Somebody says residual risk. Why will I do business continuity planning for residual risks? Tuhin Patra, to run critical infrastructure during disaster. So, do you mean to say to manage critical risks? What critical risks? Business critical risks. Risks which can bring severe downtime to my businesses. Okay. Was COVID a critical business risk which businesses never, you know, uh, anticipated? So critical is the term. So whenever you are looking business continuity, you don't look at business continuity for one laptop going faulty or one. What if a cluster of server fails? What if flooding happens in your, you know, uh, so business continuity planning, you cannot manage business continuity planning. You cannot implement business continuity planning for managing all risks, only managing critical risks. What is critical to your organization for survivability? Right? So that's the aim of business continuity planning. So business continuity planning, how do you keep a business running during a disaster? Whenever a critical risk will realize, you will have a disaster, right? Whenever there is a critical risk which materializes, you have understood your critical risk, that when the critical risk realizes in your organization, you have a disaster. And the aim is to have a cool and calm response to a disaster, to a disaster event. And that can only happen if you have planned for that event. If you have not planned for it, it'll never, you can never have a success. And what do you do for finding these critical business risks? You do something called a business impact assessment. You want to find out those critical processes which affect your business, and if those processes fail, and those processes will have dependencies on infrastructure, on people, on communications, and if that entire process fails, then there is going to be a disaster. A disaster never happens because of one single thing failing. A disaster is a chain of events, chain of dependencies which fail together to cause a disaster. And therefore, we need to understand those critical processes, identify critical processes, and from there find out if those processes go out, what will be the impact. And there are three parameters for understanding those, that is maximum tolerable downtime, recovery time objective, and recovery point objective. Recovery point objective is a very, very frequently asked question in CISSP. Can anyone tell me what is recovery point objective? You can chat it out on the, what is the main aim of testing or finding out RPO for a critical business process? Abhishek, I like your answers. Maximum tolerance for data loss. Very correct. RPO, maximum data loss, which an organization can accept. Okay. My application went down. It was not available for 1 hour. There was no hue and cry. It's ready to do. I'm ready to take that later data loss. Right? Acceptable data loss. I'm ready to, you know, accept the data loss. Generally, it's RPO, RTO, and then MTD. Okay. So if you're planning for these figures, these are the figures. RPO is less than RTO, and then maximum tolerable downtime. Right. So this generally covers domain one of CISSP. So let's take one question and let's understand the strategy when you are trying to answer a question. So you have a simple question in your on your screen. So the question is: a company is deciding whether to purchase cyber liability insurance after a risk assessment. This is an example of what response strategy. If I'm buying insurance, is it risk avoidance? No. So always in CISSP, you should try to eliminate answers. Okay, your aim should be to have a process of elimination. Remember that if you are able to eliminate two answers, the probability of your success goes by another 50%. So always first, you know, eliminate two answers. Now, CSV does not ask you such simple questions, to be honest. The questions are very, very complex. Right. Most of you might know it. Right now, somebody said, right. So somebody said C, somebody said B. So when I'm buying cyber insurance, I'm actually doing something. Am I trying to avoid? No. So I eliminate this answer first. So please have this strategy in mind whenever you're appearing for CISS exam. Always rule out the incorrect answers. By buying cyber liability insurance, am I accepting the risk? Questionable. Am I reducing the risk? Risk has already been reduced. I'm buying insurance. When do I buy insurance? When I've taken care of my health. So it's not mitigation. So between transference and acceptance, am I accepting the risk? If I'm accepting the risk, I'll not buy insurance. It's like, okay, I'm driving the motorcycle, but I don't want to buy insurance. Insurance is always to cover you against eventualities which you may not be able to cover even after doing due diligence. So this is the right answer. Okay. So answer is B, risk transference. So we have one more question. Always eliminate the answers first so that you can choose a better answer. That's a very, very important strategy of CISSP. Okay. So due care means legal compliance, due diligence means best effort. No. Due care is one time activity, due diligence is ongoing. Questionable. Due care is doing what a prudent person would do. A prudent person is supposed to take his, follow the acceptable use policy. Due diligence is verifying those actions are effective. Management decisions, looking at everything is being done correctly or not. Seems right. They are synonymous with terms in security governance. No. So out of these, I have two eliminations. One looks suspicious. This looks more promising. Right. So B is the right answer. And then we have the third answer, third question. I didn't explain these mathematical terms, but let's understand. Then organization ALE for a server. ALE means annual loss expectancy. That means if a server fails, it will lose $50,000 worth of business. Okay. After implementing a $10,000 control, I have implemented a control that reduces ARO. That means the rate of occurrence of this event reduces by half. What is the new ALE? If occurrence of an event reduces by half, what will be the new uh, ALE? Pretty straightforward, right? $25,000, of course, right? Okay, so with this we come to end of domain one, right? So domain one broadly covers these, but that's a very very short uh, part to take on, right? So it'll be $25,000, right? Right. Okay, so shall we continue with domain two? It'll take me another 15-20 minutes. So if you are okay, then I can continue with domain two, or I can take it tomorrow. Okay, so let's continue. I got two yeses. Okay, awesome. So then let's look at asset security, right? So what is an asset? Okay, let's understand what are information assets. Right. So let's start with domain two, which is asset security, right? So what is an information asset? Okay. Are people information assets? Are processes information assets? Are technologies information assets? Right. So everything is a business asset. Okay. If you look at, uh, so it looks at, you know, uh, people, process, technologies are all, you know, all part of your information asset system. But if you look at uh, asset security domain 2, it's primarily looking at the technologies as part of the asset data. So when we look at asset today, uh, a business, you know, just a second, a business has business owners, right? A business has various missions, therefore they have mission owners, and a mission might have various systems. Due diligence and due care questions are very tricky, okay, but I'll explain to you in great length. Right, a system will have system owners. Under the systems there will be, you know, data, there will be network. Okay, so we have various kind of technology which ultimately makes a business system work, and ownership has to be defined at each level wherever it is required to be. Now when we look at asset security, the things that we deal with asset security is firstly that asset requires classification. Any kind of asset, right, requires classification. Now a government entity will have government classification scheme, a non-government organization will have non-government classification schemes, such as private, sensitive, public. Now whenever we have an asset, right? A asset needs an owner. What is the meaning of ownership? Can we have one word answer or a two-word answer for this? What do we mean with ownership? And we said classification is assigned by data owner. What do we mean by ownership? We saw that owners are accountable. And what do accountable people do? Yeah, we saw that, right? They are accountable. And what do accountable people do? Is it rules or is it policies? Owners lay down policies. Always remember that. The CEO of the company cannot implement controls, right? He's accountable. So he will lay down policies that ensure that things are safe, secure, right? So owners always define policies, okay? And custodians are the ones who implement controls, right? So now in your organization, you will say, okay, I don't have a custodian. You will have someone, you will see that someone has been made a custodian. That person or that role, implements the control, implements, opens the port on a firewall or not, right? Owners define policies. Remember that. Custodians implement controls, backups, configuration management. Okay, they will do it. They will ensure. Right. Now, whenever we have classification of an asset, it's very important to label an asset. Right. Why do we label an asset? Right. We label an asset because an asset, like a data, right? An asset, data is an asset. A data will remain at rest, will move, will get used. And if you want to protect it, there has to be some kind of label so that your data loss prevention systems, your users can identify that data and can implement the policies which are required to protect the information. Therefore, labels are a very, very important part of your uh, you know data classification policy. Now, at times, what happens is we have seen in government organizations. I've served in the army for 22 years. We ended up overclassifying data. What happens when we overclassify data or information? We end up implementing controls which are not required for that data asset, right? So if your database has privacy information, you implement a control, and you implement the same control for data which not does not require that level of security, right? So over classification waste resources, under classification create risk. If you under classify, if you have privacy information in your organization, you have to be GDPR compliant. You end up under classifying it, and it gets stolen or it gets breached. So over classification and under classification both are very, very risky affairs. Now, it's very important to define the roles and responsibilities when we deal with data and systems. Now, as part of asset security, it's very important to understand that data is one of the most important asset for information security professionals, or even today, most of the organizations, have very, very stringent checks over, data security. Therefore, you need to define a data owner who can give the classification and who has the ultimate responsibility. Very, very tested concept on CISSP. Custodians, what do? They implement the controls. That's the key word. Users are normal users. Who, what do? They do what they need to do. They are given least privilege access, and they follow the acceptable use policy. Very common question in CISSP. What is an acceptable use policy? Please write it down in the chat. What is an acceptable use policy? Yeah, very common question on CISSP. A employee has not, you know, has signed the AUP but not, did something. What is that something? So ground rules. Yes, Pranav, very correct. Ground rules. You need to lay down some ground rules for everyone. A baseline of good behavior, expected behavior. Very correct, right? So acceptable use policy lays down what is the expected behavior, and from how are you supposed to. It also lays down the due care expected from everyone, in the organization. If you're laying down that you should have MFA on your application within 48 hours of enrolling, you need to configure it. Now, whenever you do, deploy an AUP. What is the most important part? Fine, everybody understands AUP. If you are implementing an AUP, what is the baseline? What you would like? How would you ensure that the AUP is followed? What is the core thing that is required in an organization so that AUP is followed? What is your responsibility as an information security manager, officer, CISO, whatever you are? How will you ensure that the AUP is effective? Do you expect the employee to sign and follow it? Okay, somebody said awareness. Very right. Training, awareness, understanding are very important part of ensuring that just by getting a AUP sign may not meet your requirement. Right? So very correct. Right. Now, when we come to privacy frameworks, we will see that there is a very very important term called GDPR. Right? In GDPR, there's an important term called data controller. Right? So what is a data controller is a very very important part, and what is a data processor? Right? Data controller is someone who determines the purpose for which a data which is collected is used, privacy information. And data processor is someone who processes that information for the task which is supposed to be used for. Very very important question. Right? Today, most organizations have somebody called the privacy officer or the data protection officer, DPO, which has become mandatory in most of the privacy framework implementation in most of the countries, whether GDPR, whether PDPL, whether DPDP. We look at now a DPO role being formalized where people understand requirements of privacy in an organization. Right? Now, once we look at data as one of the major assets, it's very important to understand the three states of data and what are the controls that are required to protect it. When data is at rest, you use encryption. When data is in transit, we use encryption. And when data is in use, it is the most hard to protect because it can be scraped out of the memory. And large part of your attack will happen on data which is uh, either not protected at rest, is not protected in transit, or while in use, because memory scraping application and malwares would like to scrape data which is insecure in the memory. Whenever you have data in your organization, you need to have retention policies. How long are you going to retain the data? Because if you don't have proper retention policies, what will happen is data will remain in your organization for a very long time, which might lead to compliance failures and which might lead to unwanted exposure because it was just residing in your organization for a very very long time. And finally, when data has outlived its life, it's supposed to be discarded or destroyed. And there are many techniques by which you destroy data. One is degaussing. If you have magnetic tapes, magnetic drives, you do degaussing. If you have physical drives which you cannot retain for much longer, you might be in a government organization where you might have to shred the hard disk, or you might have information on SSDs and on cloud where you don't have physical access to the drives. It might lead to cryptographic erasure, right? Then we also look at privacy and data protection as one of the major important requirement. There are two kinds of privacy information. One is called PII, which is personally identifiable information, and PHI, which is personal health information, protected health information, where these are all related to privacy related information. Now, whenever you employ privacy related frameworks, you will come with three major requirements. One is called a data minimization principle, wherein you say that you will only collect data which is required. You will have to deploy consent models based on kind of applications, kind of data you are collecting. Consent is a very, very important part. Have you taken the consent of the subject to collect the information? And finally, you have right to erasure, like in GDPR, in CCPA. The subject has the right to request for erasure of his or her data. These are the three major requirements in most of the privacy frameworks. Right. So this is broadly what is covered in domain 2, and let's have a few questions. Who determines classification? Owners determine classification, so owner is out. And who implements on behalf? User only follows the acceptable use policy. Controller determines, again, controller also determines policy. So three answers out. So it is custodian. Custodian always implements the controls for backup, for protection, for encryption controls, right? Right. Okay. Next question. Oops. You already have the answer. So, which data state is considered most difficult to protect? So, generally, data when it is in use, okay, it's considered most difficult to protect because because in memory you cannot protect the information, right? So, in memory, the malwares will try to steal the information, or information stealer malwares try to steal the information from memory, right? Okay, we have the next question. So, minimum amount of personal data. Purpose limitation is, what are you collecting the data for? If you are collecting the data for a specific purpose, you cannot misuse. Storage limitation is you store it for 2 years and then you delete it. Accountability, no. So minimization, generally you collect only the data which you need to collect. That's the principle of data minimization, right? So we have covered domain 1 and 2 today, okay, and tomorrow we will cover domain 3, 4, try to cover 5 if possible, right? I'm done for the day. If you have any questions, you can please ask. Well, uh, one of the key books which I refer for CISSP is uh, uh, there's no escape from a book called Cybex. It's in 10th edition right now. Okay. Right. I hope I've been able to give you a certain amount of clarity as far as CISSP is concerned for domain 1 and domain 2. Right. There are a lot of things. There's a lot of things, but overall this is the workflow for domain 1 and 2. I hope you've liked it, and we can continue with this tomorrow with domain 3, 4, and 5. I hope it brings a little bit of clarity to your CISSP mindset or an information security officer mindset. Welcome, Leroy. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And see you all tomorrow at 8 p.m. I'll cover domain 3, 4, and maybe domain 5. Thank you and good night.